I'm sorry, the Cowen family did not get justice. And I was a part of their not getting justice.
These were the words of an officer who once investigated a family massacre so brutal, so disturbing, and so heartbreaking that even now justice remains just out of reach. We're talking about the Cowen family disappearance, which quickly turned into one of the most horrific massacres Oregon has ever seen. What happened to this family was so random and shocking that by the end of this video, you'll wish they had never been found, because the terrifying truth about their deaths is even more tragic than anyone could imagine. For starters, let's get to know who the Cowen family were. Richard Cowen, 28 years old, was a hard-working man who dedicated his days driving logging trucks through the dense forests of Oregon. His wife, Belinda, just 22, was a loving mother to their two young children, 5-year-old David and their baby girl, Melissa, who was only 5 months old at the time. The Cowens lived in White City, a small town in southern Oregon, and like many families, they often sought out the beauty and peace of the nearby wilderness to get away from everyday life. So, in 1974, they decided to make a spontaneous trip to Carberry Creek near Copper, Oregon, for the Labor Day weekend. As you can imagine, this wasn't a case of a family venturing into the woods for the first time, blindly setting up camp in the middle of nowhere. No, the Cowen family were locals. They knew these woods like the back of their hands. Richard, Belinda, and their kids had spent plenty of time in the forests and towns around Copper, Oregon. They knew the land well and had always felt safe there. Now, the trip itself was actually a bit last minute. Richard had originally planned to work on the driveway that weekend, but when those plans fell through, the family decided to take a break from the routine and head into the great outdoors. They packed up their car, with their trusty basset hound Droopy in tow, and made their way to the campsite near Carberry Creek. Carberry Creek was located in a quiet, remote area not far from Copper, Oregon. But it's important to note that Copper wasn't much of a town at all. It was small, consisting of only a handful of houses and a general store. In fact, the town would cease to exist just a few years later, in 1980, when a dam was constructed on the Applegate River, flooding the area. Their plan for the weekend was straightforward. They would drive out to Carberry Creek on Friday, camp for 2 nights, and then on Sunday stop by Belinda's mother's house in Copper for a visit. Afterward, they planned to head back home to White City. The weather was perfect, sunny and clear with not a cloud in the sky. Everything seemed set for a relaxing and enjoyable time away. But as with many stories like this, things didn't go according to plan. The details of what transpired during the camping trip are unclear. No one knows exactly what the family was up to while at the campsite, though it's generally believed they were enjoying their time there. On Sunday morning, the day they were supposed to head home, Richard and young David were last seen at around 9 a.m. at the general store in Copper, which was only about a mile down the road from their campsite. They had stopped by to pick up some milk and a few other supplies, as most families do while camping. But after that, they vanished without a trace, and no one would see them again. According to sources, it was Belinda's mother who first realized that something was wrong. As mentioned earlier, Richard and Belinda had planned that they would stop by her mother's house for dinner before heading back home. So when dinner time came and they didn't show up, Belinda's mother grew concerned. She had prepared the meal, expecting them, but as time passed and there was still no sign of the family, she decided to drive to the Carberry Creek campsite to check on them. Remember, Richard and David had gone to the general store that morning to buy some milk, which meant that Belinda and the baby were back at the campsite. Could something have happened while the two men were away? By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. When Belinda's mother arrived at the campsite, she found the family's pickup truck still parked by the side of the road, just where they had left it earlier. But as she walked into the campsite itself, her sense of unease grew. Everything seemed to be in place, as if the family had only just left. The camp stove was set up, and their belongings, including the family's truck keys and Belinda's purse, were all right there in plain sight. Even a half-full carton of milk bought earlier that morning was sitting on the picnic table. Even more chilling was the discovery of Richard's wallet, which contained $21, roughly the equivalent of $135 in 2024. Alongside it was his prized Rolex wristwatch, an item that seemed like the first thing to be taken if this was a robbery gone wrong. Yet, it remained untouched. Alongside these items was an open pack of cigarettes, identified as belonging to Belinda. Strangely, the family's bathing suits were missing from inside their truck, hinting that they had planned a return trip, possibly to the water, before their sudden disappearance. Belinda's mother spent some time calling out for the family and checked the nearby river, hoping to find some clue to their whereabouts. But there was no sign of them anywhere. All their personal belongings were left behind in such a way that it didn't make sense for them to have just gone off for a short walk or a quick errand. If they had, they would have taken their essentials, like the purse and keys. The more she thought about it, the stranger it all seemed. If they had gone for a quick hike or drive, they certainly wouldn't have left their stuff behind, open and exposed, where anyone could come across it. By now, the unsettling feeling had settled in. No signs of an accident, no tracks, no evidence of a struggle, just an eerie emptiness. Belinda's mother returned home and immediately contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Soon after, the troopers arrived at the campsite only to find it just as Belinda's mother had left it, everything in place, but no sign of the family. There was no blood, no violence, and nothing out of the ordinary. The situation was described as creepy and unnerving. No one knew what to think. Naturally, the rumors began. Some speculated that maybe Bigfoot had made its presence known, claiming yet another victim. After all, the mystery surrounding the disappearance, combined with the eerie setting, left room for all sorts of strange theories. The next morning, a full-scale search began for the Cowen family, triggering one of the largest search operations in Oregon's history. But prior to this, the Cowen family's pet basset hound, Droopy, showed up alone, scratching at the door of the Copper General Store. The dog's return, without its family, made it clear that something had gone terribly wrong, and this case would be discussed by media outlets nationwide, including the New York Post, and become one of the most perplexing and haunting chapters in the state's history. The search involved helicopters with infrared technology, search dogs, and teams scouring caves, woods, and waterways, all while locals, hunters, and volunteers combed the surrounding areas. Despite the intensity of the search, nothing was found. It seemed as if the Cowen family had simply vanished without a trace. The police didn't stop at physical searches. They interviewed over 150 people in hopes of uncovering any clue about the family's whereabouts. But still, nothing came up. The community also refused to give up, though. A reward of $2,000, about $12,602 today, was offered for any information that could solve the mystery. Richard Cowen's sister even took to the Medford Mail Tribune, writing a heartfelt plea for hunters to stay vigilant. She hoped that even the smallest clue could help solve the mystery of the family's disappearance. The push for answers didn't stop there. Over 200 people wrote to Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield, urging him to get the FBI involved. Unfortunately, their request was denied. The reasoning: there was no evidence to suggest that the family had been kidnapped or taken across state lines. As time passed, investigators wondered if there could be a connection between the Cowen family's disappearance and other unsolved cases in the area. 8 women had gone missing around the same time, under similarly mysterious circumstances. The investigation took a chilling turn when it was revealed that these 8 disappearances were attributed to the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. What did this discovery mean for the Cowen case? Did it shift the investigation in a new direction, or was it just another layer of complexity added to an already puzzling mystery? As autumn turned to winter, then spring, the mystery deepened. The families and community members who had been searching were left with more questions than answers. It wasn't until April 12, 1975, more than 7 months after the Cowen family vanished, those two young gold prospectors, working near Sturgis Fork about 7 miles east of Carberry Creek, made a discovery that would provide a chilling conclusion to the Cowen family's disappearance. While searching the forest floor, they first spotted scattered bones, but as they looked up, they saw something far more chilling: a skeleton tied to a tree. Surrounding it, more bones were scattered across the forest floor, suggesting this had been a grisly crime scene for some time. Terrified by what they had found, the men quickly fled and contacted the police. Authorities arrived swiftly, securing the area and beginning their investigation. They soon confirmed that the skeleton was indeed Richard Cowen, identified through dental records. The location was now a crime scene, one that seemed more like something out of a horror movie. The police continued their search, determined to find the rest of the Cowen family. Not far from the tree where Richard's body had been found, they discovered a cave hidden behind a pile of smaller rocks. After carefully moving the rocks aside, they entered the cave and made an even more disturbing find: the bodies of Belinda, David, and baby Melissa. The Cowens had been found, but the reality of what had happened to them was even worse than anyone had imagined. Examinations of the remains revealed the horrifying truth. Belinda and her young son, David, had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. Little Melissa, only a baby, had suffered fatal head injuries, likely from blunt force trauma. Richard's body, tied to the tree, showed no signs of bullet wounds or firearm-related injuries. Instead, his cause of death was believed to be either stabbing or strangulation. However, it remained unclear whether he had died before or after his wife and children. One theory briefly emerged, that Richard had killed his family and then taken his own life. But this idea was quickly dismissed. How could he have done that if he was found tied to a tree? Additionally, the murder weapon, a rifle, was never recovered, further suggesting that someone else was responsible for the brutal killings. Whoever committed this gruesome act was likely familiar with the area, possibly even someone with intimate knowledge of the wilderness. What made this discovery even more disturbing was the fact that the very area where the bodies were found had already been searched back in September, just a week after the Cowens disappeared. There was no one in the area at the time when the search happened. The man who had previously searched that same spot confirmed it. He could even point out the exact cave he had checked, stating that the Cowen family wasn't there when he looked. So what did this mean? It suggested that the Cowen family, all 4 of them, had been held hostage somewhere else for about a week before being brought to that spot, possibly after the initial search had died down. It seemed they were still alive when they were brought there, only to be killed. The discovery of shell casings at the scene pointed to the fact that they were likely killed right at that spot. The police were desperate to talk to anyone who had been in the area around the time the Cowens were believed to have been abducted. Some campers had seen Droopy, the family's dog, wandering a couple of miles from the campsite, but they thought nothing of it at the time. The dog eventually made its way to the Copper General Store. Meanwhile, an elderly family from Los Angeles had arrived to camp at Carberry Creek on Sunday, September 1st, after the Cowens were abducted. They reported seeing 3 people, a man, a woman, and another man, in a pickup truck near the campsite. The family found them unsettling, feeling like they were waiting for someone to leave before they packed up. Could this have been Richard, Belinda, and the killer? Was the killer holding them at gunpoint in the truck? At this point, the mystery of the Cowen family's disappearance had everyone baffled. The family had no known enemies and were actually well liked by their community. Yet, there was one person who stood out as a potential suspect: Dwayne Little. Investigators still believe he may have been involved, and his chilling background has kept this suspicion alive over the years. In 1974, Dwayne was just 25 years old and lived in the small town of Rush, near the dense forests of Oregon. What made his story even more disturbing was the fact that he had been released from the Oregon State Penitentiary only 4 months before the Cowdens vanished. Dwayne had spent years in prison for the brutal assault and murder of a teenage girl, Orla Faye Phipps. At first glance, Dwayne appeared to be a model citizen, charming, good-looking, and even serving as class president. But his dark side was revealed when Orla, a neighbor, went for a horseback ride one day and never returned. After a search, her body was found, and the world learned of the terrible crime he had committed. But what was truly chilling was that no one really knew why he did it. Orla had been an innocent teenager, and Little's motives for such a horrific act remain a mystery to this day. He served a 10-year sentence before being granted parole. According to his mother, he suffered serious head trauma as a child, a common factor among many notorious criminals. On top of that, it's believed his mother's behavior towards him was psychologically damaging, not through physical abuse, but by manipulating his emotions and actions. This troubling home life may have shaped his violent tendencies in the years to come. After serving time for the brutal crime he committed against Orla, Dwayne was released in May of 1974. He moved to Medford, Oregon, where he worked in a warehouse and lived with his parents. Strangely, his parents' house was just a short distance from the Cowen family's campsite near Carberry Creek. During Labor Day weekend that year, Dwayne was reportedly in Copper, but when questioned by the police, he denied ever meeting the Cowdens or having any knowledge of their disappearance. But there was more to his story. His girlfriend at the time, who came forward after Dwayne cheated on her, told police that he owned a .22 caliber rifle. This raised some serious questions, because convicted felons like Dwayne were not allowed to possess firearms. What made this even worse was that 2 of the Cowen family members had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle. The most puzzling part, though, was Dwayne's refusal to take a polygraph test when questioned about the Cowen murders. The officers told him that if he passed the test, he wouldn't be sent back to prison for illegally possessing a firearm. Yet, Dwayne still refused. This only fueled suspicion and led to him being sent back to prison for violating his parole. He would be released again in 1977. In 1980, Dwayne's violent nature resurfaced in a chilling way. A pregnant woman named Margie Hunter was his next victim. Her car had broken down near Portland, Oregon, and Dwayne, pretending to be a good Samaritan, offered her a ride, but instead of helping, he attacked her, strangling, stabbing, and assaulting her. Miraculously, Margie survived the brutal assault and was able to identify Dwayne as her attacker. It was later revealed that they had worked together, which made her identification of him even more certain. Dwayne was convicted for this crime and sentenced to 60 years in prison. Now, if you're still not convinced that Dwayne Little might be the killer of the Cowen family, here's something that could make you rethink. Remember the testimony from the elderly couple who reported seeing a truck with a man and a woman in the front and another man in the back. They said the woman appeared to be crying, which gave them a creepy feeling. Well, it was later confirmed that the truck matched the description provided by the couple, and it was actually Little's family's truck. To make things even more unsettling, while Dwayne and his parents denied any involvement or knowledge of the Cowdens' disappearance, a miner who owned a nearby cabin revealed that Little and his parents had stopped by on Monday, September 2nd, 1974, and even signed a guest book he kept for visitors. This was just a few days after the Cowdens went missing. Even more damning, while serving time for a different crime, an inmate named Rusty Kelly, who once shared a cell with Dwayne Little, claimed that Little confessed to him that he was responsible for the Cowen family murders. Despite this, and the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Little has never been formally charged in connection with the murders. It's a haunting mystery, with so many pieces that seem to point in his direction, but no clear resolution. And to this day, the remaining family of the Cowen family still holds out hope that someday justice will be served. Dwayne is now 75 years old and serving his sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Given his age and the length of his confinement, it makes you wonder, will justice ever be truly delivered? So, I've got to ask you, what do you think? Do you believe Dwayne could have been responsible for the Cowen murders? And if he did, do you think he could have pulled it off all by himself? I mean, come on. He managed to tie Richard to a tree while Belinda and the kids were still held captive in the cave. I want to hear your thoughts. Comment down below and let's get this conversation going. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.